Hey, hello dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic, funny love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. A Fated Encounter. Emma Sterling isn't the delicate heiress people typically imagine when they hear the name Sterling, the colossal conglomerate dominating the tech and real estate industries. At 26, she's an odd mix. Razor-sharp intellect paired with a clumsiness that once led her to spill orange juice on important documents during a meeting. She loves superhero-printed t-shirts, sneakers, and is so obsessed with action movies that she's memorized every punch thrown by John Wick. Emma always pictures herself as a heroine, though her martial art skills mostly come from YouTube tutorials and a few karate classes in high school. That day was a stifling Friday afternoon. Emma had just left Sterling's headquarters after a tedious, drawn-out meeting. She despised those meetings, filled with old men droning on about profits, while all she wanted was a meat sandwich and a movie. Walking through the bustling downtown shopping district, Emma slung her crossbody bag over her shoulder, fiddled with her phone, and muttered under her breath, "So boring. I've got to rewatch Die Hard tonight." She was engrossed in her screen, barely paying attention to her surroundings. A few steps away, James Lancaster, the 28-year-old heir to the Lancaster conglomerate, Sterling's sworn enemy, leaned against a small newsstand, holding a bottle of water. Today, he wasn't in his usual sleek suit. Instead, he dressed casually, a black t-shirt, ripped knee jeans, and faded sneakers. He'd just met an old friend and decided to take a break here before heading home. His cool demeanor remained. Jet black hair, slightly tousled, sharp eyes. But no one would peg him as a wealthy heir in this everyday outfit. Beneath the icy exterior, James was secretly a total goofball, though he hid it well. At that moment, a shady man in a gray hoodie slipped through the crowd. With a swift move, he pickpocketed a wallet from a middle-aged woman distractedly paying at a street vendor. His action was lightning fast. The woman didn't notice, still casually picking out fruit. James caught sight of it, frowned, set his water down, and stepped forward to block the thief. "Hand it over, or I'm calling the cops," he said, his voice low and commanding. Panicked, the pickpocket tossed the wallet toward James and bolted into the crowd, vanishing. James caught the wallet mid-air, about to shout for the woman, but before he could, a piercing yell cut through. "Accomplice! Grab him!" It was Emma. She'd looked up from her phone just in time to see James holding the wallet as the hoodie guy fled. In her mind, it instantly clicked into an action movie script. The hoodie was the thief, and James, with his stone-cold face and the way he held the wallet like he'd just received a drop, had to be his partner. Without a second thought, she charged at him like a whirlwind. "What are you—" James didn't finish before Emma unleashed a spinning kick, a move she'd learned from a top 10 movie kicks video. Startled, he dodged but lost his balance, tumbling onto the sidewalk, the wallet flying out of his hand. Emma seized the chance, pouncing on him. With the strength of someone who'd binged the entire Jason Bourne series, she straddled his back, pinned his arms, and shouted, "Call the police! I've caught the thief's accomplice!" James, bewildered, struggled. "Are you crazy? I'm not an accomplice. Let me go!" But Emma ignored him. She pulled a green scarf from her bag, tying his hands, though it was so loose a slight tug would free him. "Shut it! You're with that guy. Don't deny it. I saw you holding the wallet with my own eyes." Triumphant, she stood up, brushed her hands, and turned to the crowd. "Everyone, relax. I've handled it." The crowd gathered, some laughing, others pulling out phones to record. The middle-aged woman, the wallet's owner, heard the commotion, turned around, patted her pocket, and gasped, "Oh my God, where's my wallet?" Spotting it on the ground near James, she picked it up, confused. Who took my wallet? I didn't even notice." Emma pointed at James. "This guy's the thief's accomplice. I caught him red-handed with your wallet." James, now fed up, growled, "I picked it up for her, and you mistook me for a crook. Do you even have eyes?" He yanked his hands free from the scarf, tossed it aside, and stood, brushing dirt off his jeans. Emma sized him up. Black t-shirt, ripped jeans, a defiant air. "Yep, totally looked like a thief's buddy." Still stubborn, she shot back, Who knows? You could be some new kind of crook, dressing normal to trick people. You're insane, James muttered, shaking his head. Just then, police sirens wailed. Two officers approached the chaotic scene. Emma standing tall like a heroine, James dusting himself off with a mix of anger and amusement, and the woman clutching her wallet in confusion. "What's going on?" the older officer asked, hand on his handcuffs. Emma pointed at James. "I caught this guy. He's the thief's accomplice. I saw him with the victim's wallet." James rolled his eyes. "She's making it up. I grabbed it from the real thief, and she knocked me down." The woman interjected. I don't know who took it. I only noticed when I heard the noise." The younger officer said, "All right, both of you come to the station with us and bring that wallet." Emma nodded proudly while James sighed. In the police car, he glanced at Emma, sitting smugly in front. "You're a walking disaster," he grumbled. She heard, turned, and glared. "What did you say?" "I'm a hero." At the station, the truth unraveled. James explained he'd only tried to stop the pickpocket, while Emma insisted he was complicit. The older officer checked nearby security footage. The hoodie guy stole the wallet, tossed it to James when confronted, and James just picked it up. Emma froze, jaw dropping. "Really? Really?" "You got it wrong, miss," the officer sighed. "He's not a criminal." Emma stammered. But why was he holding it?" James smirked. "Because I'm not the type to watch someone get robbed, unlike some people who act before thinking." "Who are you?" the officer asked Emma, spotting her unremoved ID. "Emma Sterling, Project Development Director, Sterling Corporation." She flinched, hiding it too late. James overheard, eyebrow raised. "Oh, Sterling heiress, huh? And you act like a street thug." "And you," Emma snapped. The officer showed James's ID. James Lancaster, Executive Director, Lancaster Corporation. Emma froze. Lancaster, Sterling's archenemy. She'd just caught the heir of their rival family, mistaking him for a thief's accomplice. James stood, brushed his hands, tossed the scarf back to her. "Thanks for the great show, heiress. Next time, look before you kick." Emma flushed, speechless, muttering, "Who'd have thought? Your face totally looks criminal." They left the station, eyes flashing with rivalry and a hint of curiosity. Emma never imagined this fated encounter would spark a chain of chaos and emotions she couldn't have foreseen. Chapter 2. Awkward Encounters. After the disastrous misunderstanding at the police station, Emma Sterling and James Lancaster both thought they'd escaped each other for good. For Emma, the guy in the black t-shirt and ripped jeans with a criminal face was an embarrassing memory she wanted to erase completely. For James, the clumsy self-proclaimed hero was a brief nightmare he'd rather forget. But fate, like a terrible comedy director, kept throwing them into absurdly awkward situations, forcing them to face each other again and again, much to their mutual frustration and reluctant amusement. Situation 1. Restaurant Chaos. A week after the thief-catching fiasco, Emma was tasked with going to an upscale restaurant to sign a contract with a neutral company, a potential partner interested in collaborating with Sterling on a smart management software project. She hated these kinds of meetings. They forced her to ditch her beloved t-shirts for a stiff navy business dress, high heels that hurt her feet, and a high, neat ponytail like a real businesswoman. Before entering the restaurant, Emma stood in front of the hotel mirror, muttering to herself, "Hang in there, sign this deal, and you can go home to lie down and watch John Wick." Clutching a thick stack of documents, she pushed the door open, her eyes darting around to find her partner's table amid the luxurious space filled with the scent of perfume and the clink of cutlery. But just a few steps in, she tripped over a pair of shiny leather shoes sticking out from a chair by the walkway. "Ah!" she yelped, losing her balance and stomping hard on someone's foot. Instantly, a loud crash rang out, followed by the pungent smell of red wine. She looked up, her face draining of color, as she recognized the person she just stepped on, James Lancaster. James was seated across from an important Lancaster client, a wealthy middle-aged woman considering investing in the conglomerate's latest real estate project. Today, he'd returned to his polished air persona, a tailored gray suit, a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, and jet black hair neatly combed like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. He was holding a glass of red wine, about to raise it with a charming smile for his client, when Emma's stomp made him flinch. The wine splashed onto his suit, spreading a red stain like an abstract painting across the expensive fabric. James gaped, turning to her. "You? It's you again?" Emma blushed, stammering. "You? The accomplice from last time." James gritted his teeth, trying to stay calm in front of his client. "I'm not an accomplice, and you're a walking disaster. Look at my suit." He stood, showing off Emma's masterpiece more clearly. The client, bewildered, set her water glass down and asked, Do you two know each other?" "No!" Emma and James shouted in unison, then immediately glared at each other. Emma planted her hands on her hips, unyielding. "So what? You stuck your foot out and tripped me. Serves you right." James let out a sarcastic chuckle. "Serves me right? I'm meeting a client, and you turned me into a clown. Do you even have eyes?" Emma couldn't hold back. "And what are you doing here anyway? Pickpocketing someone again?" "Pickpocketing?" James growled, struggling not to shout. "I'm working, unlike you, who signs contracts like she's trashing a village." Their argument grew louder, drawing stares from nearby diners, some whispering, "Are these two filming a comedy?" The client coughed, trying to intervene. Maybe calm down a bit." But Emma and James ignored her. "You have a client? With that face, you're obviously lying." Emma sneered, pointing at him. James shot back. "And you? Signing a deal like you're starting a brawl at the market. Your partner's probably running away by now." The bickering escalated until the restaurant manager stepped in, a man in a black suit and glasses, offering a forced smile. "Excuse me, could you two please take this outside? It's getting disorderly in here." Emma and James were escorted out amid curious glances. Outside, Emma glared at him. "This is all your fault. Now I've embarrassed myself in front of my partner." James smirked, brushing off his suit. "Thanks to you, I've got to change this shirt to finish my meeting. Let's not meet again." He turned and left, leaving Emma fuming and humiliated as her partner texted, "Miss Sterling, I saw you were busy arguing. Let's sign the contract another time. Have fun." Situation 2, a goofy charity auction. Days after the restaurant incident, Emma and James were dragged by their families to a grand charity gala, an annual event where Sterling and Lancaster had to show face despite their mutual disdain. Emma reluctantly wore a floor-length red gown, nearly tripping at the entrance in her stiff new heels, muttering, "Who invented this dress? I can't walk." James arrived in a sleek black suit, white shirt collar crisp, exuding a cool, cinematic vibe. Spotting Emma from afar, he sighed, "God, why's she here? To ruin me again?" The highlight was the charity auction, a showcase the organizers turned into a chance for elite families to flaunt their generosity. Somehow, Emma and James were shoved onto the stage together to bid on an odd item, a warped, cracked old porcelain vase that looked like it had been dropped from a second-story window. The host, a guy in a red bow tie, chirped, "This piece symbolizes resilience through hardship, starting at $1,000. Who'll kick it off?" The crowd clapped half-heartedly, but Emma and James locked eyes, sparks flying. "I bid $2,000. Emma raised her hand, not because she wanted the vase, but to mess with James, knowing he wouldn't back down. Sure enough, he smirked, raising his $5,000. Emma's eyes widened. $10,000. James fired back. $20,000. The auction turned into a personal showdown, the vase forgotten. The crowd buzzed, some laughing at their absurdity. $50,000, Emma shouted, standing tall, smirking triumphantly at James. He gritted his teeth. $100,000. The host faltered. Folks, calm down, it's just a broken vase. But they didn't care. $200,000, Emma snarled, hands on hips, taunting him. James sneered. $500,000. The room gasped, some clapping as if watching a wrestling match. Finally, James bid $1 million, silencing the hall for a moment before laughter and applause erupted. Emma crossed her arms, scoffing. Fine, you win. Enjoy your busted vase. James replied coolly. Thanks, I'll keep it at home to remember meeting you. The host banged the gavel. Sold to Mr. Lancaster for $1 million, though his glare showed his annoyance. The organizers gently ushered them off stage for disrupting the event. James paid $1 million for the worthless vase, while Emma giggled as staff shot him dirty looks while handing it over. Outside, she teased, "Congrats on your $1 million broken vase." James glared. "Better than a broke troublemaker like you. Don't let me see you again." They parted amid the crowd's laughter, the $1 million vase tale lingering for weeks. Situation 3. A subtly goofy conference. A week after the auction, Emma attended an international tech conference to pitch Sterling's new AI system for business management, seeking investors. She prepared meticulously, a light gray suit, laptop, thick documents, and a speech rehearsed all night. It was her chance to redeem herself after recent blunders. The conference drew hundreds of companies, and she had to present to a big crowd. Before stepping up, she took a deep breath. No tripping, no mistakes. Be professional. She strode on stage, starting confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sterling proudly presents a groundbreaking AI technology, delivering exceptional value to modern businesses." But mid-sentence, she spotted a familiar face in the audience. James Lancaster. He sat there in a sharp black suit, coffee in hand, smirking at her with a knowing look. He was there not to partner with Sterling, but to scout for Lancaster and keep tabs on their rival. Emma paused for a split second, heart pounding, but regained her composure. "Our technology stems from years of research, boasting superior performance." James raised his hand, politely taking a mic from the organizers, his tone smooth yet cutting. "Miss Sterling, I'm impressed by Sterling's years of research. But is this tech truly groundbreaking? Or just disruptive? Like someone I met at a restaurant last week?" The crowd chuckled, but Emma, teeth clenched, kept her professional smile. "Thank you, Mr. Lancaster, for your interest. I'm confident our product speaks for itself. No need for someone to pick up wallets for us to prove its worth." They traded subtle jabs, maintaining poise. As Emma showed a performance slide, James commented calmly, "High performance indeed, but is it as sturdy as that vase I bought last week? I'm a bit worried about Sterling's stability." Emma smiled back. "Far sturdier than that $1 million vase you willingly took home, Mr. Lancaster. We at Sterling don't indulge in such showiness." The audience tittered, missing the venom behind their polite words. James pressed on, feigning seriousness. "Miss Sterling, does this AI self-correct errors?" Sterling seems quite skilled at making them. Unfazed, she replied, "Yes, Mr. Lancaster. It even detects useless things. Like you, for instance." A few laughed louder, but both held their dignified fronts, as if it were just business talk. Emma's presentation ended with enthusiastic applause, though whispers lingered about their exchange. James stood, clapping slowly, adding, "Well done, Miss Sterling. Hope I don't have to pay to see your next show." Emma flashed a fake smile. "Thanks, I hope I won't see you at the next conference and waste my time." They left the stage, all professionalism, but their eyes blazed with mutual challenge. In the hallway alone, Emma muttered, "That guy's like a leech, always ruining me." James, a few steps away, overheard and turned. "Thanks, I've learned patience from a pro wrecker like you. Good luck with investors." He smirked and walked off, leaving Emma clutching her head in frustration, yet unable to deny he was a formidable foe. Chapter 3. Love begins to blossom. After a series of laughable yet tearful encounters, from spilling wine on a suit, bidding $1 million for a broken vase, to subtly sniping at each other during a conference, Emma Sterling and James Lancaster started getting used to each other's presence in an odd way. At first, they saw each other as sworn enemies, but with each unavoidable meeting, irritation gave way to curiosity, then an inexplicable sense of enjoyment. Though neither would admit it, fate kept pulling them closer, like a persistent prank they were both annoyed by yet couldn't escape. From those humorous, goofy moments, feelings between them began to sprout, gradually growing into something deeper and more genuine. It all started shifting one rainy afternoon when Emma stood under the awning of a convenience store, seeking shelter. She'd just left the office after a long day of meetings, her thin coat soaked, clutching a stack of smudged documents because she'd forgotten an umbrella. God, why is my life so miserable? She muttered, staring at the rain, longing to go home, wrap herself in a blanket, and watch a movie. Just then, a sleek black car glided by and abruptly stopped right in front of her. The window rolled down, revealing James in a simple white shirt, hands on the steering wheel, smirking at her. "Oh, Miss Sterling, you're so clumsy you can still be an heiress? No umbrella. At least call a cab." Emma glared, snapping back. "Who needs your concern? I like standing in the rain to cool off. What's it to you?" But her voice trembled from the cold, and her hunched shoulders didn't escape James's notice. "All that bravado and you're shivering," James chuckled, opening the car door. "Get in, I'll drive you home. Or stay there posing as a wet model. I'll snap a pic." Emma shot him a dirty look, but the bone-chilling cold left her no choice. She grudgingly climbed into the passenger seat, hugging her documents, grumbling, "Fine, drive, but don't talk too much. And go slow. I don't want to die young." James burst out laughing, a rare laugh, not cold or sarcastic, but warm, making Emma sneak a glance at him. On the ride, he kept teasing, "Are you really the Sterling heiress? I thought you were a pro at wrecking things." Emma retorted, "And you? An heir who talks like a street vendor. Who'd believe that?" But this time her tone wasn't as sharp, tinged with playfulness. They bickered the whole way, but the tension was gone, replaced by a familiar game between them. Subsequent meetings followed a similar pattern. One day, Emma ran into James at a small cafe, dropping her latte on the table while distracted by her phone. James, at the next table with his laptop, smirked. "So clumsy you can still be an heiress? Should I call the staff to mop this up, or you'll flood the place?" Emma blushed, firing back, "Shut it. I can clean it myself. No need for your pity." But as she fumbled with napkins, spreading the mess, James quietly handed her his handkerchief. "Use this. Don't make me embarrassed for you." Emma took it, glaring. "Who needs your kindness?" But she didn't toss it back as usual. She kept it, wiped the table, and folded it neatly, a small act she didn't even notice. Inside, she started thinking, "This guy isn't as bad as I thought." James, despite his cool facade, found her clumsiness oddly endearing. They began texting, mostly teasing. James sent, "Drop anything today, heiress?" Emma replied, "Yeah, the idea of seeing you." Yet they both grinned at their phones, those messages becoming a daily staple. Their bond deepened when they both joined a charity event at an orphanage. Not forced, but a personal passion they'd long shared. For Emma, these trips were an escape from Sterling's stifling meetings and parental expectations. She loved the kids' innocence, their uncalculated smiles, and feeling like her true self. James felt the same. He often volunteered to find peace amid Lancaster's stressful demands, where he had to uphold a perfect air image. Neither knew the other would be there until they locked eyes on the playground. Emma, in a white t-shirt and faded jeans, sat among the kids, handing out candy, beaming as a little girl hugged her leg. "You're so pretty, miss. Can you be a superhero?" She ruffled the girl's hair, laughing. "Sure, but this superhero's clumsy. She kicks the wrong people." James, in a light blue shirt tucked out over khakis, played basketball with older kids, sweating but sporting a rare smile. He spun and sank a shot, earning cheers, then turned to grab water from a bench, and met Emma's gaze. They blurted in unison, "What are you doing here?" Emma put her hands on her hips, suspicious. "Are you stalking me?" James smirked. "As if I'm that free." "I'm here for the kids. You're probably about to drop candy all over, right?" Emma snapped. "You're the clumsy one." But before they could argue more, a boy tugged James's hand. "Play more, mister." A girl pulled Emma's shirt. "Tell us a story." Dragged apart by the kids, they had no chance to bicker. They sat with the children, joining in drawing games and storytelling. Emma spun a superhero tale she made up, dramatic and funny. Then Super Emma flew up but kicked the wrong guy, her best friend. She apologized with cookies, but they burned to a crisp. The kids roared with laughter, clapping wildly. James, beside her, chimed in, "Yeah, that friend must have suffered. Kicked, then fed burnt cookies. I feel for him. The kids didn't get it, but Emma glared, stifling a laugh. Shut up, don't ruin my story. When the kids ran off to play, Emma and James lingered on a bench, water bottles in hand, unexpectedly opening up. Emma sighed. I like places like this more than the office. Everyone's so serious there. I just want to escape. James nodded. Me too. Work's suffocating, always keeping up appearances. No one cares what I think. He looked at her, voice softening. But seeing you here, it's kind of nice. Emma blinked, surprised. You can say nice things? James smirked. Rarely, treasure it. She laughed, then continued. I was sad as a kid. My parents were always busy. I played alone. Once I jumped off a chair pretending to be a superhero, broke my arm and no one knew. James listened, nodding. Same here. Grew up with strangers. No one asked if I was happy or sad. I once snuck out to play soccer with friends. Got scolded for a week. They locked eyes, feeling a connection for the first time. No arguing, just deep understanding. Emma smiled. So you were a troublemaker too? James shrugged. And you've been one from birth. They laughed together, watching the kids, feeling closer than ever. Before leaving, Emma gave James a rope bracelet the kids made for her. Take it, I've got two. He put it on, smirking. I'll keep it, but don't expect thanks. Emma laughed. Who needs your thanks? Their bond grew clearer when Emma caught a bad cold after a rainy meeting. She lay in bed at her apartment, feverish, head pounding. She called her assistant. Cancel tomorrow's schedule, I'm out, and passed out. James heard through a mutual friend from the orphanage. After wrestling with himself, just on the way, he grabbed supplies from a store and headed to her place. He knocked. Emma, open up. I know you're in there. She staggered out, hair a mess, in panda pajamas, voice hoarse. Who's that? Go bug someone else. James replied, It's me. Open quick, or I'll break the door. She did, wide-eyed. What are you doing here? Mocking me while I'm weak? Mocking's for later, James smirked, holding up a bag. I'm cooking porridge. Without you, who'd I mess with if you starved? Emma gaped. You can cook? Too tired to argue, she glared and shuffled back to bed. James fumbled in the kitchen, making chicken porridge, a college attempt he'd botched before. He dropped parsley, forgot to stir, and it burned. He brought out a blackened bowl. Eat. I tried hard. Emma eyed it, nearly fainting. What's this? Coal? Poisoning me? James scratched his head. I tried. Eat it. You won't die. She took a spoonful, wincing at the charred taste, but swallowed. You're awful at this. Serving burnt stuff to a sick person? James crossed his arms. Don't like it? Dump it. But he sat by her bed, watching with a mix of worry and tenderness. She finished it, despite the horror, then sank into her pillow, smiling faintly. You suck at cooking, but thanks. James looked at her, eyes softening. Rest. Next time, I'll do better. If you dare eat it. The room felt warm, their hearts stirring. Not just a fleeting flutter, but something deeper, like they'd become vital to each other. From then, their feelings grew through simple things. One night, James dragged Emma to a rom-com he picked to get back at her. She griped, This is so cheesy. He grinned. I chose it so you'd learn some romance. Stop kicking people. But at the climax, they laughed uncontrollably, and leaving the theater, Emma grabbed his hand briefly before letting go. Flustered, I just didn't want to get lost. James didn't tease, just smirked. Yeah, I might get lost too. Hold on next time. They spent more time together, park strolls, eating ice cream, which Emma dropped on his shirt, sitting on benches sharing daily tidbits. Emma loved how James listened, even with his jabs. James adored her laugh. Despite her knack for making messes he'd clean up. One day, Emma baked cookies for him, hard and salty. Blushing, she handed them over. Eat. I spent all day on these. He bit one, grimaced but finished. Awful, but since you made them, I'll eat. No more salt next time. She laughed. You dare complain? I'll make better ones. Don't beg me. James gazed at her, eyes gentle. I'll wait. Their love, from initial sparks, deepened into something profound. No grand confessions, just real, goofy, meaningful moments. They didn't yet know they were heirs of the rival Sterling and Lancaster clans, but right now that didn't matter. To Emma and James, having each other was enough. Chapter 4. Harsh Truth, a Cruel Twist of Fate. Emma Sterling and James Lancaster weren't naive fools oblivious to each other's identities. From their first encounter at the police station, where she caught him, mistaking him for a thief's accomplice, they knew exactly who the other was. Emma, heiress of the Sterling family, and James, heir of the Lancaster clan. Two families locked in a decades-long feud over fierce business rivalries. They knew, yet feelings crept in anyway. Like a cosmic joke they both resisted and couldn't escape. From their goofy bickering, playful jabs, warm moments at the orphanage, to the burnt chicken porridge, they'd fallen in love, despite constantly telling themselves this can't happen. But that impossible love was eventually uncovered by their families, unleashing a storm of opposition that thrust them into a cruel twist of fate. It all unraveled with a secretly snapped photo from the orphanage charity event, where Emma and James had laughed with the kids, momentarily forgetting the divide between their families. In the picture, Emma handed James a piece of candy, beaming brightly, while he gazed at her with rare tenderness, wearing the rope bracelet she'd given him. Taken by a Sterling employee passing by, the photo spread through high society like a bombshell. The Sterling girl cozying up to the Lancaster heir? What's going on? The image swiftly reached Mr. Richard Sterling, Emma's father, a tall, stern man with silver hair and piercing eyes. He'd spent his life clashing with Lancaster, from stolen projects and legal battles to underhanded power plays in elite circles. When his assistant placed the photo on his desk, he slammed his hand down, rattling his coffee mug. "Emma, what the hell is that girl doing? Who's this rotten Lancaster brat smiling with my daughter? I told her to stay away from that bunch." Meanwhile, at the Lancaster estate, Mrs. Eleanor Lancaster, James's mother, a commanding woman with blonde hair swept into a high bun and an icy demeanor, received a copy from her personal assistant. Seated in an armchair, wine glass in hand, her eyes narrowed as she saw her son, the Lancaster heir, chuckling with "that Sterling girl." She set the glass down, her voice low but sharp. "What in the world is James up to? The Sterlings sued us into court, nearly ruined his father's reputation. I've warned him how many times." Emma and James had always known each other's lineage, but they'd chosen to ignore it, or pretend to, savoring their stolen moments. They'd even joked about it. Emma often quipped, "So what if you're a Lancaster? I can still kick you." And James shot back, "And I can still tease you even if you're a Sterling." But now, with their families in the know, the jest was over. That afternoon, Emma was summoned to Sterling headquarters. She walked in, still in her superhero t-shirt and jeans, unaware she was about to face an interrogation. Mr. Richard stood by his desk, photo in hand, roaring, "Emma Sterling, explain yourself. You're fraternizing with James Lancaster? I've told you 1,000 times that the Lancasters are our sworn enemies. Have you forgotten how they stole our biggest project 20 years ago?" Emma sighed, not too shocked. She'd known this day would come. She shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I know he's a Lancaster, Dad. But he's not as bad as you think." Mr. Richard cut her off, slamming the desk again. "Not bad? He's Eleanor Lancaster's son, the woman who nearly bankrupted me. Did I raise you to fall for that rotten kid? You're forbidden from seeing him. Got it? Keep sneaking around, and don't blame me for locking you up." He turned away, leaving Emma standing there, eyes stinging but holding back tears to hide her weakness. That evening, James was called to the Lancaster estate. He entered the vast living room, white shirt sleeves rolled up from a morning meeting, still wearing the rope bracelet he couldn't bear to remove. Mrs. Eleanor sat in her armchair, photo in hand, voice frigid. "James, explain this. That girl is Emma Sterling, Richard Sterling's daughter, right? You know full well who the Sterlings are. So why are you messing with her?" James stared at the photo, heart sinking. He'd known Emma was a Sterling from the start, but let his feelings take over, telling himself, "It's just friendship." Facing his mother, he frowned. I know she's a sterling mom, but she's not what you think. Mrs. Eleanor stood, stepping closer, her tone cutting. I don't care who she is. She's sterling blood. Those people sued your father, cost us millions. You're forbidden from seeing her. Don't give her up, and you can kiss your inheritance goodbye. She turned away, leaving James rooted there, fists clenched, mind a mess. Both families, fueled by decades of grudge, couldn't stomach this. Emma and James, aware of the barrier from the start, hadn't anticipated how fierce the backlash would be once their feelings were exposed. Realizing they couldn't defy their families, not yet, they agreed to meet one last time at their familiar park, under the old tree where they'd eaten ice cream and swapped little stories. Emma arrived first, hands in pockets, trying to look calm though her heart was breaking. James came after, sleeves rolled up, face stoic, but eyes conflicted. They stood facing each other, silent for a long while, neither wanting to speak first. Finally, Emma broke it, forcing humor. Goodbye, Lancaster heir. If you can't stand it and want to see me, just bump into me again. I won't mind, but don't spill wine on me. I'm not as rich as you. She gave a weak laugh, but her red eyes betrayed her true feelings. James smirked, falling into their usual banter. Fine, we're done, sterling heiress. But if you miss me too much, call. I'll pick up unless Mom confiscates my phone. Then you're out of luck. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. They clung to their goofy facade, as if this were just another spat, but in truth, they were masking deep pain. Emma turned away, pretending to brush dust off her shirt. I'm off. Don't follow me. I won't look back. And if you run, you're too slow anyway. I won't wait. But her steps were slow, hoping he'd call her. James watched, hands in pockets, mumbling, Yeah, go. I'm not chasing anyone. Who'd bother? His voice cracked, his hand tightening around the bracelet Emma gave him. They parted in the fading sunset, walking separate ways, neither looking back, not because they didn't want to, but because turning around might shatter their resolve. Emma got home, flopped on her bed, clutching her pillow and crying silently. Stupid James, I knew you were a Lancaster. Why do I still like you? James returned to his apartment, sank onto the couch, stared at the bracelet, muttering, Emma, you klutz, you've got me all messed up. Why a sterling? Though forced apart, neither truly wanted to let go. Emma kept the handkerchief James gave her at the cafe, occasionally looking at it, telling herself, it's just a thing, no big deal. James left the rope bracelet on his desk, each glance recalling her smile. But he warned himself, forget it, don't think about her. Yet their hearts, despite family bands, still reached for each other, an invisible thread no prohibition could sever. The harsh truth of their identities wasn't a surprise. It was the price they paid for letting love cross that line. Emma and James, fully aware of who they were, loved anyway. And now, though separated, they held a quiet hope. One day they'd overcome this cruel twist of fate. Chapter 5. Fate pulls them back together. 2 weeks after their tearful breakup masked by goofy banter at the park, Emma Sterling and James Lancaster drifted through listless days, as if a piece of them had gone missing. That night was a chilly Friday, the sky blanketed with dark clouds mirroring Emma's heavy mood. She sat in her apartment, wearing a loose gray sweater and black leggings, her hair tied sloppily to one side. On the table sat a bottle of cheap red wine, bought from the supermarket because it looks as sad as me, and a plate of cold fries. Emma had tried to forget James by throwing herself into work, but every time she returned to this quiet apartment, his image flooded back, his smirking grin, the burnt chicken porridge, the way he teased her like no one else could. Why'd you have to be a Lancaster? She mumbled, pouring wine into a glass and taking a big gulp. The bitter taste slid down her throat, but it couldn't erase her sadness. She stared at the handkerchief James had given her, still on the table since their parting, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. I'm supposed to be tough. Why am I like this? She told herself, but the more she drank, the less she could hold back. After her third glass, her head spun, and in her drunken haze, she made a wild decision to run to James. Emma grabbed her coat, slipped on old sneakers, and bolted out without locking the door. She stumbled through streets under a light drizzle, tears mixing with rain on her face. "James, you idiot! I have to tell you," she yelled, slurring her words, drawing stares from passers-by who took her for a crazed drunk. She knew where he lived. He'd driven her home once and pointed out his apartment from afar. So even in her stupor, she found her way to his upscale complex. Reaching his door, she pounded on it. "James! Open up! It's me! Emma!" Her shouts echoed, heedless of the midnight hour. Inside, James sat on his couch, a cold coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the rope bracelet Emma had given him. Sleepless, he kept thinking of her, despite telling himself to move on. The banging jolted him, and hearing her voice, he rushed to open the door. As it swung open, Emma flung herself into his arms, nearly knocking him over. "James, you idiot! I miss you!" She sobbed, hair wet and clinging to her face, coat streaked with rain. James froze, half panicked, half amused. "Emma, what are you doing here at this hour? Are you drunk?" He caught the sharp whiff of alcohol, but her eyes, clouded by liquor, shone with raw honesty. "So what if I'm drunk? I miss you for real." Emma clung to his shirt, mumbling. "My dad forbids it. Your mom forbids it. But I don't care anymore. You're mine. No one can stop that." James sighed, guiding her inside and shutting the door before nosy neighbors peeked out. "All right, drunk or not, stop yelling. The whole building will hear," he said, half joking, half worried, easing her onto the couch. Emma wouldn't sit still, hugging him tightly, slurring, "Don't leave. I don't want to break up. I like you." Then she slumped into his chest, passing out mid-sentence, leaving James flustered yet touched. He looked at her, heart softening. This girl, so reckless, even drunk. He couldn't push her away, fearing she'd wake up scared, so he let her lean on him. Before long, they both drifted off on the couch, Emma gripping him, his arm instinctively around her shoulders. Morning came, sunlight piercing the curtains onto Emma's face, waking her. Head throbbing, she panicked, realizing she was in James's arms on the couch. Her clothes were a mess, sweater askew, one leg draped over him, while James slept, head against the couch, coat tossed over a chair. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends. "Emma, you really ran to James's place? Congrats on getting back together. You were wild last night," she yelped, startling James awake. "Wait, what's happening?" She leapt off, face flaming, clutching her head. "Why am I here? What did you do to me?" James yawned, rubbing his eyes, calm. "You got drunk, ran here at midnight, banged on my door screaming, then hugged me and passed out. Oh, and you wrote on my face." He pointed to his cheek, scrawled in marker. "You're mine, Emma." Emma gawked. When did I write that?" James smirked, pulling out his phone to show a security cam clip he'd saved. A drunken Emma, marker from his coat pocket, left from a meeting, scribbling on his face as he settled her on the couch, giggling. "You're mine. No one can take you." She watched, mortified, covering her face. "God, I was that wasted? Delete it." James laughed. "No way, it's a keepsake." They stared at each other, silent, then burst into laughter. Awkward yet easy. Emma sat back down, sighing. "I can't believe I went that crazy. You're not mad I showed up?" James slid beside her, gentle. "Mad? You were drunk and still thought of me. I'm thrilled. Plus, you yelled I'm yours for the whole block to hear. I can't escape now." Emma blushed, looking away. I was so sad, drank, and couldn't hold back." "What about you? Why didn't you kick me out?" James took her hand, serious. "I missed you too, Emma. No matter how much our families forbid it, I can't live without you. You running here last night, I knew I can't let go." They locked eyes, laughing again, not just at the absurdity, but at fate pulling them back. Emma scooted closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "So what now?" James hugged her. "We'll figure it out. Let me enjoy this first." They sat there, clothes rumpled, hair wild, the gap between them gone. Despite the storms ahead, they knew they couldn't live apart, and this time, nothing would tear them away. Chapter 6. Leaving Everything Behind for Love. After the night Emma, drunk, ran to James's apartment, hugged him tightly and declared, "You're mine," in front of the entire complex, both realized they couldn't live without each other, no matter how high the wall between the Sterling and Lancaster families stood. Their love had become undeniable, but to be together they faced a tough choice: abandon their families, their inheritance, and the luxurious lives they'd known. And they chose love, despite everything. The morning after that wild night, Emma and James sat on the couch in his apartment, still groggy, clothes rumpled from the night before. The marker scrawl, "You're mine, Emma," had been washed off James's face, but their gazes held no hesitation. Emma sipped the coffee James brewed, this time not burnt like his porridge, and sighed. "My dad will never accept you. He hates the Lancasters to death." James nodded, setting his cup down. "My mom's the same. She threatened to disown me if I didn't cut ties with you, but I'm done living like that, always obeying others." He looked at her, voice firm. "Emma, I want to be with you, not as the Lancaster heir, just James. What about you?" Emma gave a faint smile, her eyes lighting up. "Me too. I'm sick of being the Sterling heiress. Endless meetings, keeping up appearances, never being myself. If it's between family and you, I pick you." She scooted closer, taking his hand. "But if we leave, we'll lose everything. Money, inheritance, all of it." James smirked, his half-joking, half-serious grin. "Lose it then. I don't need that stuff to live. Just don't make me eat your burnt porridge." Emma lightly punched his shoulder. "You dare bring up my porridge? I don't need your cooking either. It's awful." They burst into laughter, and in that laughter, they made the biggest decision of their lives: to leave it all behind and start anew. They acted fast. Emma wrote a brief note to her father, Mr. Richard Sterling. "Dad, I'm sorry, but I choose my happiness. I don't need Sterling anymore. Don't look for me." James texted his mother, Mrs. Eleanor Lancaster. "Mom, I'm giving up my inheritance. I want to live for myself. Goodbye." No formalities, no arguments. They knew more words would be pointless. They packed a few clothes, some personal savings, and left the city that night in an old car James bought from a friend, abandoning the glittering lights of their privileged lives. Emma and James settled in a small town hundreds of miles away, a peaceful place with tree-lined streets, red-roofed houses, and no one who knew them. They rented a modest one-story house, its white walls faded, with a tiny, weed-filled garden. It wasn't lavish, but it had a cozy kitchen and a living room just big enough for two to watch movies. With their remaining cash, they opened a little cafe out front, naming it Goofy and Full of Drama, a funny, fitting reflection of their lives. On opening day, Emma stood behind the counter in a gray t-shirt and green apron, clumsily brewing coffee, spilling water on the table. James, in a white shirt over khakis, fumbled with the cash register, nearly dropping a customer's money. "You're so clumsy. Can you really run a cafe?" he teased, wiping the table for her. Emma snapped back. "And you can't even work a register. What kind of heir are you?" They laughed loudly, and the customers, mostly locals, joined in, swept up in their cheerful vibe. Goofy and Full of Drama soon became a town favorite. Emma crafted a quirky menu with names like Burnt Brew, inspired by James's porridge fiasco, and Klutz Latte, a jab at herself, while James decorated with their sloppy joint sketches, ugly but meaningful. They lived simply, no fancy cars, no designer clothes, but happily. Each night after closing, they sat on a bench outside, munching cheap fries and swapping silly daily tales. One day, washing cups behind the counter, James looked at Emma, voice warm. "No more Lancaster or Sterling, just you and me." Emma paused, beaming. "Then you're washing dishes from now on." "I'm not doing it. I'll stick to coffee." James smirked. "Fine, but if you brew it burnt like me, I'm running away." She flung the rag at him, and they chased each other around the cafe, laughing like kids, amusing nearby regulars. Their joyful life lasted a few months until one quiet afternoon. As Goofy and Full of Drama buzzed with customers, Mrs. Eleanor Lancaster appeared alone, unannounced. Dressed in a plain brown sweater and sunglasses to avoid recognition, she slipped in and sat in a corner by the window. She silently watched her son. James carried a tray of pastries to a group of students, teasing, "Finish it, or you're washing dishes." Emma, behind the counter, brewed coffee for an old lady, grinning when praised. "Little miss, your coffee's delicious." Eleanor observed their laughter with customers and each other, their eyes sparkling with a joy she'd never seen in James at the Lancaster mansion. Sipping a Klutz latte, she smiled faintly, recalling her disownment threat, wondering, where did I go wrong? When the crowd thinned, she saw Emma and James sit at a table near the counter, sharing fries. Emma stuffed one in James's mouth. "Eat! Don't let me finish it all." He laughed, feeding her one. "You eat more, or you'll out-klutz me." They roared, unaware of her presence. Eleanor lingered, then left quietly, leaving a decision unvoiced but firm in her heart. She wouldn't disturb their happiness. Days later, she arranged to meet Mr. Richard Sterling at a small city restaurant, not to feud, but to talk as equals. Richard, surprised but curious, arrived in a casual checkered shirt instead of his usual suit. The four of them, Richard, his wife Margaret, Eleanor, and her husband Henry, sat facing each other, tension initially thick. Eleanor spoke first. "Richard, I visited the kids' cafe yesterday. They're happier than ever." Richard frowned. "What cafe?" Eleanor explained, showing a photo she'd taken from afar. Emma and James joking at, goofy and full of drama. Richard stared, silent, then sighed. "I've never seen Emma smile like that. I thought cutting her off from Sterling was right, but now—" His voice trailed off, eyes misty. Eleanor nodded. "James, too. Maybe we were wrong, Richard. We've fought our whole lives, but the kids don't want that." The four looked at each other, seeing not rivals but parents for the first time. Richard said, "Let's give them a peaceful life. I'm tired." Eleanor agreed. "Me too. Let's end this war." They shook hands, a rare gesture after decades of enmity. Quietly, they ordered their companies to halt economic battles. No lawsuits, no rivalry. Sterling and Lancaster reconciled, subtly but enough to bury the long feud. Emma and James knew nothing of the shift. They continued their simple life in the little house, as goofy as ever, at goofy and full of drama. One evening, under the cafe's awning, Emma leaned on James's shoulder. "Was all this worth it?" He kissed her hair. "Worth it. You're all I need." They laughed, gazing at the stars, knowing that despite leaving everything, they'd found the greatest treasure, and now nothing could tear them apart. Chapter 7. A perfect ending. After months of blissful living at goofy and full of drama, Emma and James were suddenly summoned back to the city by all four parents. Mr. Richard Sterling, Mrs. Margaret Sterling, Emma's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Lancaster, and Mr. Henry Lancaster, James's father. "We're done for. A showdown's coming." James panicked, picturing Mr. Richard slamming the table and Mrs. Eleanor yelling. Emma smirked. "If they fight, you shield me, okay?" They got in the car, a mix of nerves and giggles, bracing for a confrontation. But at the Sterling headquarters meeting room, they were stunned to see Mr. Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Mrs. Eleanor, and Mr. Henry sitting together. No trace of anger. Mr. Richard sighed. "I thought I'd lost you, Emma." Mrs. Margaret nodded. "If you're happy, I agree." Mrs. Eleanor smiled faintly. "James, me too." Mr. Henry added, "You two are a mess, but we won't stop you." Emma and James gaped, exchanging looks. "No fighting?" James stammered. Emma burst out laughing. "I thought we'd have to bolt again." A few days later, all four parents jointly organized their wedding in the Sterling family's garden. Emma wore a simple white dress, James a slightly tight black suit, both grinning ear to ear as guests cheered. Mr. Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Mrs. Eleanor, and Mr. Henry sat at the same table, raising glasses in a toast. Mr. Richard said, "To your happiness, don't run off again." Mrs. Eleanor chimed in, "But James, no burning anything." Mrs. Margaret laughed. "Emma's plenty clumsy too." Mr. Henry nodded. "It's in the genes." They shot each other brief glares, then laughed heartily, sparking chuckles from everyone. Post-wedding, Emma and James returned to the city, joining their parents to form the Sterling-Lancaster joint venture. Mr. Richard and Mr. Henry oversaw strategy, while Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Eleanor handled finances. The two rival conglomerates turned partners, reconciled by their love. Emma and James stayed goofy, bickering over who made better coffee, then cracking up at their flops, prompting the four parents to shake their heads. These kids will never grow up. Their perfect life unfolded in a small house near the venture's headquarters. One evening, they lounged on the couch, munching fries, swapping old stories. Mr. Richard, Mrs. Margaret, Mrs. Eleanor, and Mr. Henry dropped by, joining them. Mr. Richard asked, "You two doing all right?" Emma leaned on James. "We made it, didn't we?" James grinned. "Yeah, but no more drunk dashes to my place." Mrs. Eleanor cut in. "And don't burn the kitchen." Mrs. Margaret nodded. "Emma, don't drop stuff either." Mr. Henry roared, "A whole goofy family." Their laughter rang out, proving Emma and James's quirky love not only overcame hatred, but united two families in lasting joy. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.